Well, this morning we continue in our series on Nehemiah. The title of the series is called Under Construction. The whole idea has been around leadership and what leadership does and how leadership functions. And we're going to be doing the same thing today. And I want to talk to you about the 8 attributes that you need in your life to be able to have a new beginning. And maybe you've been in this series and you've been listening. When I walked into the building earlier this morning, there was a lady that was already in the building. And she kind of waved to me and walked over and we started talking. And she was explaining to me that she's an educator. And as an educator, she was thanking me for the series in Nehemiah. And she said, you know, at my school, we were having a meeting and I was telling them that this series would be something great for us to listen to and to be able to do as a team. And that really meant the world to me, because when I stand up here or sit and have the opportunity to be able to teach, my whole idea is, how can this help you during the week? How can I be able to help you as a dad? How can I help you as a mom? Because both of those are probably the most important leadership roles that you're ever going to face in your life, are being a parent, you know, to your children and raising your children. How can I help you to be a better leader in your community? You know, by getting involved in volunteering and doing work in your community. How can I challenge you to be a better leader in the life of your church? And we're blessed with a lot of great leadership, but we need even more people to step into leadership roles for us to be everything that God has called us to be as a church. And so the whole series around Nehemiah is really about leadership. And of course, the very first person that you have to lead is you have to lead yourself. And so we talked about that on the first week, you know. How do you lead yourself? And so I'm going to give you the attributes here that if you are going to have a new beginning in your life, that this is a great way, and these are great things that you would implement, attributes that you want to manifest in your life. And so next week is going to be the end of the series, and I'm not going to be preaching a long message next week because we're doing a couple of really neat things. We're going to be doing communion next week, and that's always a beautiful time. You know, we got the one service where we can really focus, and you're going to have a lot of great music. That's going to be extended. But also next week, we're going to be ordaining a gentleman named Greg Vandegrift. And Greg is the head football coach over at Prince Avenue School, and they're working on a three-peat themselves. They've won the last 2 state championships in their classification in football in the state of Georgia. And Greg, if the name sounds familiar, his son Brock is the backup quarterback at the University of Georgia. I actually held Brock and dedicated him as a child, as I did their 2 other children who are also college athletes. One of them graduating from high school is going to be playing at the University of Alabama softball. Another daughter is at Eastern Kentucky, and she's a volleyball player. They're just an amazing family. But Greg is at that stage in life where he's done so much in coaching that he's thinking about, but what do I want to maybe do with a new beginning one day? You know, maybe whether it's a year, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, what do I want to be able to do? And one of his goals is to be able to work for a great organization, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, one day. That would be a goal in his life. And so we're going to be licensing him and ordaining him next week. It'll be about a 5 or 6 minute segment in our service. But what an honor and privilege for us to be able to do that, because Greg Vandegrift is a tremendous leader. I mean, he is a fantastic football coach. He's been a great friend. He would tell you that I've been his mentor for about 25 years, along with his wife, Kelly. But I would tell you I've learned a lot more from him just watching the way that he's been a coach, the way that he's just as interested in producing great young men as he is in having success on the athletic field. And so it'll be an honor for us to do that. So leadership is involved, whether you're a coach or whether you're leading in the business world or whether you're leading in a community activity or you're in your Rotary Club or you're, in a Kiwanis Club. Leadership is something that everyone needs. And we talked about on the aspect of being a spiritual leader, that leadership is prayerful, that a leader does a lot more things than pray, but the first thing a leader should do is to be a person of prayer. And then we talked about different principles all through this series, things that I love, like, leadership is influence. John Maxwell and Zig Ziglar have been the two great influences in my life when it comes to leadership. And John Maxwell is the one who's fond of saying that leadership is influence. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. And we talked about the fact that everything is going to rise and fall on leadership, that nothing gets done until someone steps up and says that they're going to lead. And the same thing is true in your family. And men, God has really challenged us to be spiritual leaders within our families. We need to step up. We need to get better at what we are doing as husbands and as fathers. We talked about the fact that leadership is courage. You have to have courage. I'm going to talk about it at the very end of this message today. That leadership is resiliency. Because can I tell you something about being a leader? My granddaughter Addison asked me last year, she said, so Biggie, that's my name. I couldn't go with Peepaw. Biggie. Makes me kind of sound like a rapper, doesn't it? I kind of like that. So she said, Biggie, so what is being a leader? And I said, Addison, it's called solving problems. I mean, that's what leaders do. Leaders are problem solvers, and they like to step to the forefront and they want to lead. But you've got to be resilient, because if you're not resilient, then the grind can get to you. The grind can bring you down. So you got to make sure as a leader you're taking in more than you're giving out, because there's an ebb and flow to your energy that you have. And when you're spiritually leading, I promise you, there is an energy component that is absolutely essential when it comes to doing ministry. You remember the story where there was a woman with an issue of blood, and she heard that Jesus was passing by, and she thought, if I could just, she needed healing, if I could just reach out and touch the hem of his garment, then maybe I might get healed. And so there's a whole crowd pushing around Jesus. He's on his way to a major religious leader's house or a personality. And so she reaches out and she hits the hem of his garment, and Jesus stops in his tracks and he says, who touched me? And the disciples go, what do you mean who touched you? There's all these people pushing and shoving. He said, no, you don't understand. Someone touched me, and he uses the word dunamis. He said, power just flowed out of me. Anyone that is a leader, energy flows out of you when you're working and when you're dealing with other people and you're dealing with their problems. You've got to make sure that you're taking in more than you're giving out, or you'll get burned out and you'll turn around and you'll walk away. It will just absolutely get to you. I can remember in college, I was in a class that had a lot of ministerial students, and one day the professor said, take a good look around this room. There are probably about 35 of us. He said, over 80% of you in this room will never finish in ministry. You'll drop out, something will happen, you'll disqualify yourself, something will come along. And now looking back all of those years later, I see that he was absolutely right. So you've got to be resilient. You've got to be resilient about the things that you believe in. You can't go with every little whim and every little, new thing that comes floating into the atmosphere. You've got to be locked in on what it means to be that person of God. And then leadership is about relationships. And so what I want to share with you today is what does it take to be a great leader, and to give you 8 attributes. And these 8 attributes, you'll know exactly where I am in the message. The good news is, as I get to the end of it, they start going a little bit faster, all right? So here's number 1. You gotta have a passion for compassion. Nehemiah was a compassionate leader. You remember in Nehemiah chapter 1 in verse 4, when he talked to Hananiah, who had been to Jerusalem, he saw how terrible it was. And even though Nehemiah lived 800 to 1,000 miles away in what we would call today Iraq, he got a passion for going back and helping the city. Because Hananiah said, it's in a horrible shape. It's terrible what's going on there. And it says in Nehemiah 1:4, when I heard these things, this is from the diary of Nehemiah, that the walls were broken down, the gates have been burned with fire, the people are in distress, they feel like they're under reproach, they feel like they don't matter. He said, I sat down, I wept, and for some days, I prayed, I fasted, and prayed before the Lord. I mourned, fasted, and I prayed. He did that for 4 straight months. I mean, why should he be upset? He's the cupbearer to the king. He's 1,000 miles away from that problem. Well, because he knew that even though it was going good for him, he knew that there were other people it was not going so well for. And that's what we have to do, I believe, as Christian believers. We need to be activists. We need to be concerned about social justice issues. We need to be making a difference and helping people, because what you have to understand is the majority of the world is in pain. Whether they're in pain physically right now, which so much of our world is, or emotionally, or relationally, the world is having difficult times. And Nehemiah was a man of compassion, and he led from the experience of love. He loved people, and he cared about people, and he wanted to be able to make that difference. And in Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 6, he said, when I heard their outcry to these charges, I was very angry. In other words, he said, I made a decision here that I was going to get involved, and he started by being angry. See, sometimes what you get motivated by is not just what you're passionate about from a good sense, but sometimes you see things the way they are, and you go, you know what, that's not right. And we need to help make a change. And I need to help make a change. So sometimes even anger can be a loving reaction. And here's the deal, and you've heard it said so many different times, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so as a leader, the bottom line is love. Do you love people? Do you care about people? Does our church love people? Do we care about people? Because leadership without love, listen to me, is nothing more than manipulation. If you're not looking out for someone else's higher and best good, then you're just looking out for your own. That's why when this church is described, we're described as being a compassion-focused church. Now, you hear about, purpose-driven churches and those kinds of things, which is good. It's just we've defined our purpose is that we're going to be compassion-focused. That's going to be one of our core values. And one of our core values at Piedmont is, because people matter to God, then people matter to us. And we're going to make sure that we're doing the right thing by people. We're going to love them. We're going to care about them. We're going to have that passion for compassion. That's why this afternoon, I'm looking forward to joining with a lot of you as we're going to have a Treasures in the Dark afternoon. And it's going to start at 3:30. It's going to go to 5. And if you've lost a loved one, or maybe you've gone through a divorce, or anything that would put you into a grieving, moment in your life or moments in your life, I want to show you how to be able to deal with that, especially during the holidays. Because, the holidays, you see so many people that are filled with joy and excitement and all those things. And if you're hurting it almost hurts more when you see other things that are going on, but you don't feel that joy. So that's why this afternoon, man, I'm so proud. Abigail put this together. My daughter, Abigail Reichard-Fusco, put it together. And we're going to have a group of people. And there's still, if you still want to come, I think over 50-something people have already signed up. You come on and you be there this afternoon. It'll be over in our conference center. So leaders are compassionate. Now, I promise you, these get shorter as we go. Leaders are contemplative. They have contemplation in their life. In other words, great leaders instinctively know how do you balance the time. And listen to me, leaders. If you're in a situation where you're leading right now, please listen to me. You need to know how to balance the time that you spend with people, the time that you're leading people, and the time that you have alone with God. Great leaders know I've got to have downtime. I call it white space on your calendar. When we used to have a calendar, I'd actually block out that time, because the effectiveness of your public leadership is going to be determined by your private life. You will never rise above in public that which you are in private with God. And when you look at Nehemiah, you see those two things go together. Nehemiah was a man of prayer, and Nehemiah was a man of action. But you see that before he takes the action, he prays. 9 times in the book of Nehemiah, he prays. That establishes him as a man of prayer. And he's a man of contemplation, because every decision he had to make, every crisis he was having to go through, and every criticism that he got, he prayed about those things. You remember, he's going to rebuild the walls, and he shows up in Jerusalem, and it says the most interesting thing. It says for 3 days, all he did was stay in his room. He just stayed there. And you say, well, what was he doing? I think he was contemplating what was in front of him. I think he was praying about it. I think he was getting his strategic plan together. And the way that he was doing that was he was talking to the Lord and asking God for guidance. You know, he was going over in his mind what was going on. And great leaders spiritually know that they have to spend time alone with God, because they spend so much of their time in public life. And what he was waiting for was perspective. And here was the perspective. God, what do you want me to say to these people? So let me ask you this question. Do you ever speak without thinking? You know what? You have to be careful. And, you know, just for me in my life, it happens more often than maybe a lot of other folks do in their life. If you get the Marietta Daily Journal, you'll see an article there today, and I'm on the front page, and it was a reporter that I didn't even realize was there when I was speaking for the Chamber of Commerce at the East Cobb Business Association, where they named the Citizen of the Year in East Cobb. I didn't know that there was a reporter that was in the room, and so I gave a speech that morning. You know, thank the Lord I didn't say anything too bizarre or outlandish, but you know, you really ought to approach life that way all the time, that somebody might be taking notes and might be sharing what you're getting ready to share, because I don't want to speak without thinking. And one of the laws of leadership that we have to learn, or we're going to get ourselves in trouble, is when we speak before we think. Great leaders know how to contemplate. And he said, I pondered what I was going to say. What am I going to say to these people? So we know he's a man of compassion. We know he's a man of contemplation because he's spending time in prayer and he's thinking about things. The third thing, and I promise you these get faster as we go, is he's a cheerful leader. I don't know about you, but I don't like to follow people that are grumpy. I don't like to follow people that are rude. You know, I've been around some leaders, I don't think they died, I think they just nastied away. People just looked around and went, where did that nasty person go? I don't know. They just nastied away. Here's what I believe about Nehemiah. I believe he's a positive guy. I believe he's upbeat. I believe he's optimistic. I believe that he has a positive attitude. People do not like to follow grouchy people. And you might get a lot done as a leader and being one of those people, but I tell you one thing you won't have relationships. And I mean, it just will not happen. So wouldn't you rather follow someone with a positive attitude? And Nehemiah was a very cheerful person. You say, now, Ike, how in the world do you get that idea in your mind that he was cheerful? Well, remember when he went before the king and he was gonna, if he got an opening, he was gonna ask the king, can I go to Jerusalem and rebuild these walls? And so Nehemiah had been serving this guy all of his life, and he goes in and the king looks at him and says, why is your countenance downcast? Because Nehemiah said, I had not been sad in the king's presence ever before. Ever before. But he looks at him and he knows something's wrong. He's always been cheerful, upbeat. He didn't go in and lay his problems on the king. And here's the deal. If you're going to be a leader, you're to be an encourager, not a discourager. And the job of leadership is you want to lift people up. You don't want to bring people down. And that's why cheerfulness is an important characteristic. If you want to be a leader, then you're going to have to work on your cheerfulness. And if you say, well, I'm a leader and I'm not cheerful, I bet everybody around you knows that. I bet you not one person will be shocked and go, wow, I just never really noticed that. Because some people by nature, I understand, are not naturally cheerful. But do you know that you can smile your way into a good attitude? Do you know that medical professionals say there's actually a biochemical change that when you start smiling? And my mentor, Zig Ziglar, he did this experiment one time with some doctors because he was such a great motivational speaker. They actually did a blood test with him, blood test before he would speak and then a blood test after he would do the speech. And there was actually a chemical change. And now, of course, we know there's endorphins, there's all of these other things that hormones are produced in your body. There's so many different things that happen when you're cheerful. And I just believe that that is the absolute key. And this may sound terrible for me to say, but if I had to choose being around somebody that cusses or somebody that's negative, I'd choose the person that cusses. And you say, why? Because if they're cussing, I'll go, oh, come on now. You've got a bigger vocabulary than that. You can do better than that. But if somebody's negative, it makes me want to cuss. That's not good. You don't want a cussing preacher. I'm just telling you. You don't care how skinny the jeans are. You don't, no matter how many tats, you don't want a cussing preacher, all right? So you want to be strong in the Lord and be cheerful with those that you lead. You remember I told you in the beginning, I said, the first job of a leader is define reality. Second job of a leader is offer hope. Cheerful people offer hope. And Nehemiah in chapter 8, he gave his secret. He says, this day is sacred to the Lord. This day is sacred to the Lord. And he said, because the joy of the Lord is my strength. You notice he didn't say my happiness, because joy and happiness are two different things. Joy is different from happiness in that happiness depends on happenings. The word happy is a derivative off the English word happenstance, which means that different things that are going on, external things make the difference in how you feel about things. Now, for those of you in the corporate world, you know about this because we do those things called a SWOT analysis, SWOT, right? You talk about your strength, talk about your weaknesses, what are the opportunities, and then we talk about what are threats. And threats are things that you cannot control. They're outside of your control. So here's what the Bible teaches us. Now, the psychologists call it internal locus of control versus external locus of control. The Bible just calls it joy. And it says that when you have joy, that's not based on all the circumstances going on around you, but it's something that's continual. And the way that it's continual is you spend time reading God's Word. You spend time praying. You take the time to come to church. You take the time to spend time with God, and you're contemplative. And when you're contemplative that way and you're focusing on God, that's going to give you the cheerfulness in your life to be a great leader. Now, Nehemiah also had concentration. He always focused on his goal. And one of the key differences between leading and following is that leaders are always thinking about the future. They have to think out further ahead of everybody else. How are we going to handle this situation? I can remember the day vividly. On Friday the 13th of March in the year 2020, when we found out, and I was in a meeting at Must, when we found out how bad it looked like the pandemic was going to be. I can remember calling Robin after the meeting and saying, "You're not going to believe what I've just heard." And it meant the whole world was going to change, and boy, did it ever. And so we're in this meeting hearing, and basically at Must, we do like 5 things. We call them wraparound services. We help people with housing, we help people with food, but we help people with clothing, we help people with medical, and we help people get jobs. Those are 5 things we do. And so I'm there with my executive team, and I said, here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to focus on 2 things. We're going to have to focus on feeding people because of how bad this is going to be, and we're going to have to focus on housing people. That's the 2 things that we're going to have to focus on. And that was the decision that we made. On the housing side, in 2019, I would say on any given night when you put your head on a pillow, 300 people put their head on a pillow provided by Must Ministries. During the 3 years of the pandemic, each night, 1,500 people a night. Because people were getting evicted. People were losing their housing. All of these things were going on. We went from giving away 1 ton of food a day on average to 4.5 tons of food. Do you know that because of the pandemic and where we are today, that between 2021 and 2022, that childhood poverty doubled in this country? It doubled. That's the U.S. Census Bureau. It doubled. And so as a leader, I had to make a decision. We're going to focus, we made a decision as a team. We're going to focus on getting people housed. We're going to focus on feeding people. And we said to our workforce development team, we got a fabulous guy named Nate March that heads up that area. We said, why don't you guys focus? We had some funding, and why don't you help us get ready when the pandemic ends? There's going to be a lot of people needing jobs. When everybody begins to hire again, when the restaurants open up again. Why don't you do this? And they did. So when the economy started coming back, this past year, we helped 812 people to get jobs. It represented $26.7 million back into the economy because we invested in artificial intelligence. And if any of you are ever needing a job, or you've got a friend or a relative that's in a situation, it's absolutely free. It's something that we do. And we were trying to look out and ahead. What's going to be happening in the future? And that's what Nehemiah was doing. Leaders are always thinking about the future. That's the mark of leadership. So in chapter 3, and I'll reference that next week as we get ready to have communion together, he organizes the work. He's very focused. And I think the best example of how Nehemiah concentrated is how did he deal with distractions? Because you remember there was Tobiah, and there was Sanballat, and there was Geshem. There were all these people who came and said, stop working on the wall and come down and talk to us. He says there were 4 specific times that they came and said, we want you to do this. But you remember what he said? He said, I'm doing too great a work to come down off the wall. When you're working on your marriage, don't come down off the wall to get in petty arguments and do dumb things. Stay on the wall. Stay after it. Focus, concentrate. That's the principle of a mark of a leadership. The Apostle Paul, I wish I had time to go into this, he said, there's one thing I do. And he says, I forget all this stuff that's behind. He said, but there's one thing I do as I press forward to what lies ahead in the upward call of my life in Christ Jesus. You see, that's what we need to be doing. And he said, there's one thing I do. He didn't say there's 40 things I dabble in. There's 50 things I could do. He says there's one thing that I do. Just think about it with light. You know, light diffuse does what it's doing right now. But when you focus light, it becomes a laser. It has the ability to be able to cut through, you know, metal and to cut through steel. The more focused your life is, the more concentrated your life is, the more effective it's going to be. You've got to have the ability to be able to focus. Now, because he was taking time to contemplate, because he knew how to focus, it resulted in creativity. And that's the next point. Nehemiah's life is one of creativity. You said, well, define creativity for me. Is that being artistic, musical, all that? No. When I'm talking about creativity here, it's the way you approach problems. How do you approach problems? It's fascinating to watch him because some people think, well, that's just something you're born with, or you just got a predisposition. I don't really think so. I think it can be developed like a skill in your life. It's a way of thinking. And Nehemiah becomes a creative problem solver. And one of the best ways is in chapter 4, when there were people who opposed the rebuilding of the wall, and they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to come in and we're going to attack you while you're trying to build the wall. Nehemiah said, I want a sword in one hand. I want a trowel that you mix mortar with in the other hand. And I'm going to station all of you with your family. Because you know what? If a family's right, you'll fight to your last drop of blood to take care of your family. I know I sure would. I'd do anything in my power to protect my family and to look after them. And so in that situation, he said, therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest point of the wall in those exposed places, and I posted them by families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And he even has a creative work shift because he knew if I can get you working together as a family and you actually get along as a family, you'll devastate the enemy. But as long as you as a family are fighting with each other, that's called the holidays. You want to get your family on the same page, right? Next thing he had, courage. Courage. He left a well-paying, safe, secure job in order to go do something totally different. And you know what? He didn't have any preparation for that. That took courage. He said, I'm going to go and I'm going to do what God called me to do. And all through this series, we've talked about courage. And courage is another way of saying the word faith. And the Bible says without faith, it's impossible to please God. Are you willing to trust Him? And you've heard me use this quote because it comes from one of my heroes, Dr. Adrian Rogers, who said, courage is nothing more than fear that said its prayers this morning. So we want to be a praying group of people. The other thing that Nehemiah has here is a clear conscience. He said, I'm going there with the right motives. Even when other people were questioning his motives, he said, no, I'm not going there to try to be king. I'm going there to do the right thing. He was a man of integrity. Now, the word integrity comes from a Latin word. The root is integer, which means oneness. This building has architectural integrity. It means that it holds together, right? So when you're a person of integrity, one of your greatest tests will be when you have success, there's three things that go with it: power, prestige, and privilege. The more powerful you are, those things flow to it. Power, prestige, and privilege. So what happens when you're the smartest person in the room? What happens when you're the most influential person in the room? You want me to tell you? It might surprise you. You have less options. Think of it as a triangle with success at the top. On one side of that triangle, you have success and influence. So you got influence here. On the other side of that triangle, you've got responsibilities. Because as your influence increases, so do your responsibilities in life. And then in the middle of that triangle, just imagine it, write the word option. When you have little influence and when you have little responsibility, you got a lot more options. I mean, you can do a lot of different things. But the higher up the leadership ladder you go, just watch that options inside. As the triangle begins to narrow, so do your options. I don't have the option to do certain things in my life. I choose not to take those options. Those options are certainly there. I choose to live my life in a certain way. I choose that there's things that I will not be involved in. I'm not going to be around. I don't care how much pressure. I don't care what we pass in our country that says you have to do this or you have to do that. There are certain things that are non-negotiables to me. They narrow my options. Every leader needs to know that. If you're asking for a full cup from God, make sure that you're remembering your influence and your responsibility and your options are narrowing and getting more and more narrow. Power, prestige, privilege. Go with power. Few people can handle it. It goes to their head and it overwhelms them. And they take advantage of it. If you don't believe me, take a good look sometimes at people that are in public office on a national level. Take a look at what they were worth when they went in and take a look at what they're worth when they go out. Because they were worried about themselves. Feather their own nest. We need leaders that won't compromise and that go in to do what is best for this country rather than what's best for me. So I'm off my soapbox. Last thing, conviction. Conviction. And by the way, thank God for people who do run for public office. Lord, help me. I can't even imagine the pressures they're under. So you remember conviction? I said this last week. I'm done. He had a compelling purpose. Had a compelling purpose. Every person needs that compelling purpose. By the way, if you get Marlon's epic, he's been breaking these down and really going into them. Now people are throwing things at me to get off the stage. Number two, that's my Georgia Tech professor throwing things at me back there. Just because y'all are bowl eligible, you threw something at me. Man alive. He had a clear perspective. He was continually in prayer. He had courageous persistence. Which one of those character qualities are strongest in your life right now? Which one's the weakest? Which one of these character qualities would you like to develop the most? Finding out your purpose, getting that clear perspective, being a better prayer. That's the area I struggle in. I've told y'all before. Sometimes, man, just making time to just go. I just need to be contemplative and just be before God because I always feel like I've got to be doing something, Because you were probably raised like me. If I was in my house when I was a kid, my mother would go, "What are you doing in the house? Get out of here." I had to do something. Courageous persistence. Wow. It's amazing, isn't it? You look at these things. Any of you building a business, you go, "Man, if I could get an employee that had those 8 things, woo, we'd conquer the world." Well, imagine conquering your family. Imagine building things like that in. Imagine taking a message like this, and thank God for Rick Warren and Saddleback Church that did this series years ago. What would it be like if your kids were raised to know those things? Hey, some of y'all coach. And you can use these things helping them. Y'all can come on and start getting this stuff if you want to. I got a buddy named Ira Blumenthal. Ira is 77, was it, Robin? 77 years old. He was an All-American lacrosse player, tremendous speaker, one of the dearest friends I've been blessed with in my life, and his wife, Kim. But Ira has been an assistant coach of the lacrosse team over at KSU. And they've won all these major tournaments all over the country and everything. But he gave it up this year at 77. You say, is he tired? No. He's now coaching his grandchild in lacrosse. Hey, take those attributes. Take them, coach your kids. Coach them up. These are things that will change your life. And if you need that new beginning, I'm telling you, this stuff will do it. Stand with me. We're going to go right straight into our invitation. So guys, y'all come on out, Matt, get us ready to go. This is a song that is perfect for this moment. It's called Tremble. When you think about God, what do you think about? Because it's the most important thing about you. I tremble because of how awesome God is. If you don't know him, I'll meet you right down here in the front. You can come down and say, hey, Ike, I want Jesus. I had the privilege this week of leading a true leader to Christ. I've admired her for so long, and I had the privilege of her asking Christ into her life. It don't get any better for a preacher than that. I promise you. Maybe today you want to come down and pray about your family or leading or saying, God, increase my influence. Go and find the prayer of Jabez and begin to pray that prayer, that God would greaten your influence in life. Father, thanks for the time. God bless the worship that we have now and decisions that could be made that would change the entire course of our life. In Jesus' name I pray.